The gavel hit the wood with a sound like a gunshot, but for Jason Sterling it sounded like a cash register ringing. He smirked, looking across the aisle at his wife Ethan, who sat with her head bowed, trembling. He thought he had just pulled off the perfect heist. The house, the custody, the multi-million-dollar tech firm, he took it all. He walked out of that courtroom feeling like a god. But he didn't know that the victory champagne was about to taste like ash. He didn't know that while he was celebrating, a black sedan was pulling up to the venue, carrying a man who held a single envelope that would turn Jason's victory into a prison sentence. This is the story of how arrogance blinds you before it buries you. The air in courtroom 4B of the San Francisco Superior Court was stale, recycled, and thick with tension. But to Jason Sterling it smelled like impending freedom. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, charcoal gray, slightly shimmering under the harsh fluorescent lights, and tried to suppress the grin threatening to split his face. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Holloway said, his voice a low drone that echoed off the mahogany panels. "Based on the evidence provided regarding the mental instability of Mrs. Sterling and the financial mismanagement detailed in Exhibit C, the court rules in favor of the plaintiff." Jason didn't hear the rest. The words washed over him in a wave of euphoria. Full control. That was the only phrase that mattered. He had secured full control of Sterling Vance Dynamics, the company his wife's family had founded, and he had managed to secure the deed to the estate in Marin County. He glanced to his left. Ethan sat there looking smaller than he had ever seen her. She was wearing a simple beige cardigan, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She wasn't looking at the judge. She was looking at her hands, which were folded tightly in her lap. She looked defeated, broken. Perfect, Jason thought. Exactly as planned. He had spent 2 years gaslighting her, moving money into offshore shell accounts in the Caymans under the guise of bad investments, and paying a psychiatrist, Dr. Aris Thorne, to testify that Ethan was suffering from severe paranoid delusions. It had cost him a fortune in bribes and legal fees, but today the ROI was infinite. "Court is adjourned," the judge said, banging the gavel. Jason stood up immediately. His lawyer, a shark named Marcus Reeves, who charged $900 an hour, clapped him on the shoulder. "We did it, Jason," Marcus whispered, his breath smelling of peppermint and coffee. "Total knockout. She didn't even contest the final asset division." "She couldn't," Jason replied, loud enough for Ethan to hear. "She knows she's not capable of running the business. I'm doing her a favor, really." Ethan stood up slowly. She didn't look at him. She simply gathered her purse, turned, and walked out the side door without a word. No screaming, no tears, no drama. It was almost disappointing. Jason wanted her to beg. He wanted her to realize that he was the superior intellect, the one who had taken her father's legacy and made it his. "Forget her," Marcus said, guiding Jason toward the main exit where the press was waiting. "Tonight we drink the good stuff. I booked the private room at the Obsidian." The scene outside was a blur of flashbulbs. Jason played the part of the solemn, burdened husband perfectly. "It's a tragedy when a marriage fails," he told a reporter from the Chronicle, keeping his face grave. "But my priority now is stabilizing the company and ensuring my wife gets the help she needs." He was lying through his teeth, and he loved every second of it. By 8:00 p.m., the solemn act was dropped. The private room at the Obsidian was dimly lit, vibrating with the bass of lounge music, and filled with the kind of people who attach themselves to power like barnacles. "To Jason," shouted Lisa, his executive assistant, and the woman he'd been sleeping with for the last 18 months. She raised a crystal flute of Dom Perignon. To the new king of Silicon Valley. To the king! The room roared. Jason laughed, loosening his tie. He downed the champagne and immediately signaled for another bottle. He felt invincible. He pulled Lisa close, her perfume intoxicating him. "Did you see her face?" Jason whispered into Lisa's ear, shouting over the music. "She looked like a kicked puppy. I almost felt bad. Almost." Lisa giggled, tracing the lapel of his suit. "You won, baby. It's all yours. The house, the patents, the accounts. We can finally stop hiding. Marcus tells me the transfer of the primary holdings triggers at midnight," Jason said, checking his Rolex. 4 more hours and Sterling Vance Dynamics legally becomes Sterling Corp. The Vance name is gone forever." "And her father?" Lisa asked, a flicker of worry crossing her face. "Arthur, you know he wasn't in court today." Jason scoffed. "Arthur Vance is a dinosaur. He's been retired in the Hamptons for 5 years, playing golf and losing his memory. He doesn't have the stomach for a fight. Besides, Ethan was too ashamed to tell him the details. He probably thinks we just grew apart. By the time he realizes I've gutted his legacy, it'll be too late." Jason poured himself another glass. The liquid gold swirled. He looked around the room at the sycophants, the lawyers, the investors. They all looked at him with envy. This was it. The pinnacle. Then the music stopped. It didn't fade out. It was cut abruptly. The heavy oak doors to the private VIP room swung open. The bouncer, a massive man named Tiny who was paid to keep people out, was stumbling backward, clutching his chest as if he'd been shoved by a bulldozer. The room went silent. Standing in the doorway was not a bouncer or a cop or a waiter. It was an old man. He wore a heavy wool trench coat, despite the California heat, and a fedora that shadowed his eyes. He leaned on a cane, but not out of weakness. It looked more like a weapon in his grip. It was Arthur Vance, Ethan's father, and he wasn't alone. Flanking him were 4 men in dark suits who didn't look like lawyers. They looked like the kind of private security that carried guns and didn't ask questions. Jason froze the champagne glass halfway to his mouth. The arrogance that had fueled him all day flickered just for a second. He hadn't seen Arthur in 3 years, and the man looked different, harder. Arthur stepped into the room. The sound of his cane hitting the hardwood floor was rhythmically terrifying. Click, step, click, step. "Arthur," Jason said, forcing a smile onto his face as he stepped forward, trying to regain control of the room. "I didn't know you were in town. We were just toasting to the future." Arthur stopped in the center of the room. He looked around at the expensive decor, the half-empty bottles, and finally rested his gaze on Lisa, who shrank back against the velvet booth. Then his eyes locked onto Jason. They were cold gray and devoid of any emotion. "Toasting," Arthur repeated. His voice was gravel low and rough. "Is that what you call it when a vulture picks a carcass clean? Now wait a minute." Marcus, the lawyer, stepped in, smelling a confrontation. "Mr. Vance, this is a private party. Your son-in-law—" "Ex-son-in-law," Arthur corrected sharply. "As of 4 hours ago." "Right," Marcus stammered. "Well, Jason has full legal ownership of the premises and the company assets. If you're here to cause a scene, we have security." Arthur chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. He snapped his fingers. One of the men behind him stepped forward and handed Arthur a thick manila envelope. "I'm not here to cause a scene, Marcus," Arthur said, looking at the lawyer with disdain. "I'm here to deliver a wedding gift. A parting gift, I suppose." Jason laughed nervously. "A gift? A bit late for that, Arthur." Look, if you're here to beg for Ethan's allowance, the judge was very clear. She gets the condo in Seattle and a monthly stipend. That's it. The condo in Seattle, Arthur mused. Yes, nice place. Rainy. Arthur took a step closer to Jason. The room was deathly quiet. Even the bartenders had stopped wiping glasses. You think you're smart, Jason, Arthur said softly. You found a girl with a soft heart, you married her, you got into my company, and then you systematically dismantled her sanity to steal it. It was a bold plan. Cruel, but bold. I won in a court of law, Arthur. Jason spat, his anger rising. Because Ethan is incompetent. And frankly, so were you for letting the company drift. I saved it. You won in state court, Arthur corrected. Judge Holloway's court. A man I've known since law school. A man who curiously just paid off his vacation home mortgage 2 days ago. Cash. Jason's blood ran cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Arthur smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. But you see, Jason, while you were busy bribing doctors and forging signatures on the merger documents, you forgot one very specific detail about the Vance family history. Arthur held up the envelope. What is that? Jason asked, his voice tighter than he wanted it to be. You celebrated winning Sterling Vance Dynamics, Arthur said. You celebrated winning the patents, the real estate, the accounts, but you never checked who actually owned them. I own them, Jason shouted, slamming his hand on a table. The judge signed the order. It's done. The judge signed an order transferring Ethan's shares to you, Arthur said calmly. But Ethan didn't own the company, Jason. Jason stared at him. What, she had 51% of the stock. It's in the public filings. She held 51% of the voting rights, Arthur corrected, through a proxy agreement I set up when she was 18. But the assets, the intellectual property, the buildings, the cash reserves. Arthur opened the envelope and pulled out a single yellowed document. It looked old. The paper was heavy. The ink faded. This is a master irrevocable trust dated 1998. Arthur said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the room. Called the Vance Heritage Trust. Every single asset of the company is owned by the trust. Ethan was merely the beneficiary, and the trust has a very interesting clause regarding hostile actions by spouses. Jason felt the room spin. That's impossible. My due diligence team, your due diligence team, saw what I wanted them to see, Arthur interrupted. I knew what you were, Jason, the day I met you. A climber, a grifter. I knew you'd try to take it eventually. So I laid a trap that took you 5 years to walk into. Arthur tossed the document onto the sticky table in front of Jason. Read Clause 14, Section B, Arthur commanded. Jason's hands shook as he picked up the paper. He scanned the dense legal text until his eyes found the highlighted section. In the event that a beneficiary's spouse attempts to seize control of trust assets through divorce proceedings, legal manipulation, or coercion, the beneficiary status of said spouse is immediately terminated. Furthermore, any such attempt constitutes a breach of the non-disclosure agreement signed upon marriage, triggering the penalty clause. Penalty clause, Jason whispered. Turn the page, Arthur said. Jason flipped the page. Penalty clause. In the event of a breach, the spouse, Jason Sterling, agrees to assume full personal liability for all outstanding debts of the holding shell company, SV Dynamics Operations, while forfeiting all claims to the trust assets. I don't understand, Jason stammered. What debts? The company is profitable. The trust is profitable. Arthur explained, his face hardening into granite. The operating company, the shell you just fought so hard to win full ownership of that shell, has been absorbing the toxic assets of our failed solar venture in Nevada for 6 years. Arthur checked his watch. It is now 8:15 p.m., Arthur said. Since the judge signed the order transferring the operating company to you at 4:00 p.m., you have been the sole owner of SV Dynamics operations for 4 hours. Arthur leaned in close, so close Jason could smell the old man's tobacco and rage. Congratulations, Jason. You are now the proud owner of $450 million in debt. And since you signed the personal guarantee in the courtroom today to expedite the transfer, they can come for your personal assets, your car, your apartment, this suit. Jason dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor like a dying bird. No, Jason gasped. No, this is a lie. Marcus. He turned to his lawyer. Tell him he's lying. Marcus was pale. He was furiously typing on his phone. He looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. Jason, I'm looking at the corporate registry updates. The trust lien just popped up. It was dormant until the divorce decree was filed. It looks real. And there's one more thing, Arthur said, reaching into his pocket again. What more could there be? Jason screamed, hysteria setting in. The police, Arthur said simply. You see, in order to prove Ethan was incompetent, you submitted falsified medical records from Dr. Thorne. Thorne was arrested an hour ago at the airport, trying to flee to Brazil. He gave you up, Jason. He told the feds everything about the bribes, the fake diagnosis, the wire fraud. Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder, cutting through the silence of the room. Arthur buttoned his coat. I told you, Jason. I didn't come to make a scene. I came to watch you realize that your victory celebration is actually your retirement party. You're going away for a long time. To understand the sheer magnitude of Jason's collapse, you have to understand the depth of his cruelty. The trap Arthur Vance sprung at the Obsidian wasn't just business. It was vengeance for a torture that had lasted 2 agonizing years. It started subtly. Jason didn't wake up one day and decide to destroy Ethan. It was a slow, corrosive process, like rust eating through iron. 2 years prior, Ethan Vance was a vibrant, sharp-witted woman. She ran the charitable arm of Sterling Vance Dynamics and was known for her keen eye for art and philanthropy. But Jason needed her out of the way. He needed her voiceless. It began on a Tuesday evening in November. Honey, where did you put the deed to the Lake Tahoe cabin? Jason asked, rummaging through the safe in their master bedroom. Ethan looked up from her book. It's in the blue folder, Jason, where it always is. Jason pulled out the folder and shook it upside down. Empty. Ethan, it's not here. Did you move it again? You've been forgetting things lately. I didn't move it, Ethan said, frowning. She walked over, checked the safe, and felt a cold knot in her stomach. It was gone. I found it in the trash can in the kitchen this morning, Jason said, his voice dripping with faux concern. He pulled the document from behind his back. You threw it away, Elle, along with the coffee grounds. I would never do that, Ethan protested. It's okay. Jason soothed, kissing her forehead. You're stressed. The gala is coming up. Just let me handle the important papers for a while, okay? That was the seed. Over the next 6 months, Jason watered it with poison. He hired a technician to remotely access Ethan's laptop and delete random emails, making her miss crucial board meetings. When she swore she never received the invites, Jason would show her the sent logs on the server logs he had forged. He moved her jewelry. He changed the passcodes to the alarm system, and then let the alarm scream while she panicked, claiming she was entering the code she had always used. He made her doubt her own reality. But the final nail in the coffin was Dr. Aris Thorne. Jason met Thorne not in a hospital, but at a high-stakes poker game in Macau. Thorne was a psychiatrist with a suspended license in 2 states and a mountain of gambling debt. He was exactly what Jason needed. "I need a diagnosis," Jason had told Thorne over a glass of whiskey in a dark corner of the casino. "Paranoid schizophrenia, early onset, rapid deterioration. That requires a history of symptoms," Thorne said, eyeing the stack of chips Jason pushed toward him. "Documentation, therapy sessions." "I'll create the symptoms," Jason said coldly. "You just document them, and then when the time comes, you testify." For the next year, Jason drugged Ethan's evening tea with low doses of scopolamine and hallucinogens he acquired through the dark web. It wasn't enough to kill her, but enough to make her see shadows, hear whispers, and lose track of time. One night Arthur Vance had come for dinner. Ethan was in the kitchen, trembling. She gripped the counter, staring at the wall. "They're watching me. Dad," she whispered. Her pupils dilated from the drugs Jason had slipped her an hour before. "The walls are breathing. Jason says I'm sick." Arthur had looked at his daughter, terrified. He looked at Jason, who stood in the doorway with a look of tragic sorrow. "I'm doing everything I can, Arthur," Jason had said, putting a comforting hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Dr. Thorne says the best thing is to remove stress. Take away her responsibilities. I'll take over the company duties. It's a burden, but I'll do it for her." Arthur hadn't said a word then. He had just watched Jason's hand on his shoulder. He saw the micro-expression of triumph in Jason's eyes. Arthur didn't believe in coincidences, and he didn't believe Jason. That night, after leaving the house, Arthur didn't go home. He went to a private investigator named Silas Graves, an ex-Mossad agent who charged fees that would bankrupt a small nation. "Find out what he's giving her," Arthur had ordered, "and find out where the money is going." It took Silas 6 months to find the offshore accounts. It took another 6 months to turn Dr. Thorne's nurse, who provided the evidence of the falsified medical records. Arthur had the evidence to destroy Jason a year ago. But he waited. He waited because he needed Jason to fully commit. He needed Jason to sign the divorce papers, to unknowingly sign the debt trap liability clause, and to stand up in court and declare himself the sole owner. He needed Jason to hang himself. Back in the VIP room of the Obsidian, the music was dead, but the air was screaming. The sirens outside weren't just background noise anymore. Blue and red lights flickered against the tinted windows of the club, casting a disco ball effect of doom across Jason's pale face. "Marcus!" Jason screamed, grabbing his lawyer by the lapels. "Do something! You said the asset transfer was ironclad. You said the trust was dissolved." Marcus Reeves, the shark, who had never lost a high-profile divorce case, shoved Jason away with surprising force. "I acted on the information provided by my client," Marcus said, his voice shaking, but loud enough for the room to hear. He was already playing to a future jury. "I had no knowledge of any fraudulent medical records or coercion. If you misled me, Jason, our privilege is void under the crime-fraud exception." "You coward!" Jason lunged at him, but Tiny the bouncer, who had recovered from his initial shock, grabbed Jason by the arms. "Don't touch him!" Tiny growled. The staff had sensed the shift in power. Jason was no longer the VIP. He was the liability. Lisa, the mistress who had been drinking to Jason's kingdom moments ago, was frantically typing on her phone. "Lisa," Jason pleaded, looking at her. Call your father. The judge knows him. We can fix this." Lisa looked up. Her eyes were devoid of the adoration they held 10 minutes ago. She saw a man who was about to be $450 million in debt and facing federal prison. "I think I should go," Lisa said, grabbing her clutch. I didn't know you were still married, Jason. You told me it was over years ago. I'm a victim here too." "A victim?" Jason laughed hysterically. "You helped me pick out the wallpaper for the penthouse while Ethan was in rehab." "I have to go," Lisa said, pushing past Arthur Vance without making eye contact. Arthur didn't stop her. She was a rat fleeing a sinking ship. She didn't matter. Then the doors burst open again. This time, it was the FBI. 6 agents in windbreakers marked FBI swarmed the room, followed by 2 uniformed SFPD officers. The lead agent, a tall woman with a stern face, scanned the room and locked eyes with Jason. "Jason Sterling?" she asked. "This is a misunderstanding," Jason shouted, trying to shake off the bouncer. "My father-in-law is trying to blackmail me. He forged those documents." "Jason Sterling," the agent continued, ignoring his outburst. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, money laundering, and the embezzlement of corporate funds." She stepped forward, pulling a pair of metal cuffs from her belt. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No." Jason backed away, knocking over a table of expensive drinks. The glass shattered, soaking his Italian loafers in sticky alcohol. "You can't do this. I own this city. I own Sterling Corp." "You own nothing," Arthur Vance said from the corner. He hadn't moved an inch. "You own a mountain of debt and a cell number." The agents didn't have patience for a tantrum. 2 of them grabbed Jason, forcing him face first onto the sticky bar counter. The click of the handcuffs was louder than the gavel had been earlier that day. As they hauled him up, Jason looked wild-eyed. He looked at the crowd, his friends, who were now holding up their phones recording his downfall for Instagram and TikTok. The flashlights were blinding. "Arthur!" Jason screamed as they dragged him toward the door. "Arthur, please, I'll sign it back. I'll give it all back. Just don't let them take me." Arthur watched him go. He waited until Jason was dragged out of the room, his screams fading into the hallway. Only then did Arthur's shoulders slump. The adrenaline faded, leaving an old, tired man in its wake. He leaned heavily on his cane. "Mr. Vance," one of the security guards whispered. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Arthur said quietly. "Is the car ready?" "Yes, sir." "Where to?" "The hospital," Arthur said. "I need to tell my daughter she's free." The holding cell at the Federal Detention Center in Dublin, California was cold. It smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies. Jason sat on the metal cot, his suit jacket seized as evidence shivering in his dress shirt. It had been 48 hours, no bail. The judge had deemed him a significant flight risk, given the offshore accounts Arthur's investigator had uncovered. The reality was setting in, but not fully. Jason still thought there was a way out. He was a manipulator. He just needed someone to manipulate. The heavy steel door buzzed and clanked open. "Lawyer," the guard grunted. Jason shot up. "Marcus." But it wasn't Marcus. It was a court-appointed public defender named Sarah Jenkins. She looked overworked, tired, and thoroughly unimpressed. She carried a thick file and sat down at the small metal table bolted to the floor. "Where is Marcus Reeves?" Jason demanded. "I pay him a retainer." "Mr. Reeves has formally recused himself and is currently cooperating with the district attorney in exchange for immunity regarding his role in your financial structuring," Sarah said without looking up from her papers. "You don't have a private lawyer, Mr. Sterling. All your assets have been frozen. Your accounts are at 0. Actually, they're below 0. Jason slumped back onto the cot. Cooperating, that traitor. Let's look at the situation, Sarah said, adjusting her glasses. The evidence against you is overwhelming, Doctor. Thorne has confessed to fabricating your wife's medical history. We have bank transfers from your shell company to Thorne's account labeled consulting fees sent the day after she was committed. That's a straight line to conspiracy. I can explain that, Jason said automatically. Save it for the jury, though I wouldn't recommend it, Sarah said. But that's the criminal side. The civil side is where you're really in trouble. She pulled out a document that looked painfully familiar. It was the personal guarantee regarding the SV Dynamics operations debt. Your father-in-law wasn't lying. Sarah said, a note of disbelief in her voice. I've never seen a legal trap this specific. When you accepted the assets in court, you triggered the transfer of the debt liabilities to your personal name. The total is $452 million. I'll declare bankruptcy, Jason sneered. Chapter 7. Wipe it clean. Start over. Sarah looked at him with pity. You can't. The debt stems from fraudulent conveyance. Under federal law, debts incurred through fraud cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. You will owe this money until the day you die, Jason. Any wages you earn, any inheritance you get, any lottery ticket you win, it goes to the creditors. Who are the creditors? Jason asked, feeling the walls closing in. Banks, insurance companies. They'll settle for pennies on the dollar. Sarah flipped a page. Her face paled slightly. Well, about 60% is owed to standard venture capital firms, she said. But there's a block of $150 million in high-interest bridge loans that were sold to a holding company called Tartarus Ventures. Who are they? They are a front for the Solntseebskaya Bratva, Sarah whispered. The Russian mob. Apparently the shell company you took over had borrowed heavily from the wrong people to keep the solar project afloat years ago. Arthur Vance kept them at bay with interest payments from the main trust. But now, Jason's throat was dry. Now you are the debtor, Sarah said. Arthur stopped the payments the moment the judge signed the order. The Russians are looking for their money, Jason, and they don't file lawsuits. Jason felt the blood drain from his face. He wasn't just broke. He wasn't just going to prison. He was a marked man. You have to get me into protective custody. Jason stammered, his arrogance finally shattering completely. If I go to general population, if they have people inside, I'll try, Sarah said, standing up. But protective custody is for people who are in danger because they are witnesses. You're just a guy who owes bad people a lot of money. The system doesn't have a specific cell for arrogant idiots. She knocked on the door to be let out. Wait, Jason cried out. What about Ethan? Does she know she can stop this? She still loves me. I know she does. Sarah stopped at the door. She looked back at him. I spoke to Mrs. Vance's attorney this morning, Sarah said. She's not thinking about you, Jason. She's already at the gallery. She's planning an exhibition. She's free. And from what I hear, she's never looked better. The door slammed shut. Jason was left alone in the silence. He sat on the cot, burying his face in his hands. He thought about the champagne, the applause, the feeling of being a king. It felt like a lifetime ago. He closed his eyes and all he could see was Arthur Vance's face and the ghost of a smile as he handed him that envelope. The real truth wasn't that Jason had lost. The truth was that he had never really been playing the game. He had just been a pawn, thinking he was the king, while the real players moved the board around him. And the game was far from over. Because inside the prison, News travels fast. And a man with a $150 million debt to the Bratva has a very short life expectancy. While Jason was rotting in a 6x8 cell in Dublin, attempting to trade his designer watch for protection from a tattooed inmate named Sledge Ethan Vance was fighting a different kind of battle. She wasn't in a prison, but for the first few weeks her mind felt like one. Arthur had taken her to the Sanctuary, a private rehabilitation clinic in the hills of Napa Valley. It wasn't just for the wealthy. It was for the broken. The doctors there, unlike the corrupt Dr. Thorne, were kind but firm. The toxins in your system are clearing, Ethan said. Dr. Sterling, no relation. A cruel irony of a name told her one morning as they sat in the garden. The scopolamine and the hallucinogens mimic psychosis. You weren't going crazy. You were being poisoned. But the chemicals are gone now. What's left is the trauma. Ethan stared at a hummingbird hovering over a hibiscus flower. For 2 years she had been afraid of birds. Jason had convinced her they were drones sent to spy on her. Now she just saw a bird. I let him do it, Ethan whispered, shame coloring her cheeks. I let him take everything. I signed papers I didn't read. I doubted my own father. Gaslighting is a form of psychological torture, the doctor said gently. You didn't let him do anything. You survived him. Arthur visited every Sunday. He never mentioned the company, the lawsuit, or Jason. He brought old photo albums. He brought her favorite lemon squares from the bakery in the city. He was rebuilding the bridge Jason had blown up. One afternoon, 3 months after the arrest, Arthur sat on the bench beside her. The board of directors is asking about you, Arthur said, tentatively. Ethan stiffened. Tell them to sell it. I can't go back there, Dad. That building, it's his. Every hallway reminds me of him walking like he owned the place. Arthur sighed. The building isn't his L. It never was. And the company is suffering. The interim CEO is a number cruncher. He doesn't have the vision. He doesn't have the heart. The employees, they're scared. Jason fired the head of R&D, the HR director, the lead engineer. He gutted the culture. Ethan looked at her father. She saw the age in his face. He had fought a war for her, a silent war of legal maneuvers and private investigators, just to give her a chance to stand up again. I'm not strong enough, she said. Arthur took her hand. You're a Vance. We don't break. We bend, and then we snap back harder. A week later, a black town car pulled up to the glass and steel headquarters of Sterling Vance Dynamics, soon to be renamed. Ethan stepped out. She wasn't wearing the beige, shapeless clothes Jason had forced her into. She wore a sharp navy blazer, tailored trousers, and heels that clicked with authority on the pavement. She wore her mother's pearl earrings. She walked into the lobby. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who had been there for 5 years, looked up. Her jaw dropped. Mrs. Vance? Sarah gasped. It's Miss Vance, Ethan corrected with a warm smile. Is the boardroom prepped? Yes. Yes, ma'am. But we didn't know you were coming. That was the point, Ethan said. She took the elevator to the top floor. The doors opened to the executive suite. It had been redecorated by Jason black leather chrome, cold and sterile. It looked like a villain's lair. I'll change the carpet first, she thought. She pushed open the double doors to the conference room. The board members were mid-argument. They stopped. Silence descended. Ethan walked to the head of the table, the seat Jason had occupied for 2 years. She didn't sit. She stood behind the chair, gripping the leather back. Gentlemen, Ethan said, her voice clear and steady. I understand there's been some confusion about the direction of this company. I'm here to clarify it. A balding man, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat. Ethan, we were told you were indisposed, unwell. I was, Ethan said. I had a parasite. It's been removed. She threw a folder onto the table. This is the new strategic plan, she announced. We are rehiring the R&D team Jason fired. We are liquidating the assets he bought for his personal vanity projects. And we are returning to the core mission my grandfather started: sustainable energy innovation. Henderson looked at the folder, then at her. And if we disagree, then you can resign, Ethan said simply. Because the trust controls the voting shares, and I am the trust. For a second, nobody moved. Then Henderson smiled, a genuine smile. Welcome back, Ethan, he said. 6 months later, the morning sun over San Francisco didn't look like hope. To Jason Sterling, it looked like a spotlight he couldn't turn off. The trial of United States vs. Jason Sterling had become a carnival. The sidewalk in front of the federal courthouse on 7th Street was a sea of broadcast vans, satellite dishes, and reporters hungry for the final act of the Silicon Valley Bluebeard saga. When the transport van arrived, the flashing bulbs created a strobe effect that made Jason nauseous. He was led out in handcuffs, shackled at the waist and ankles. The charcoal Italian suit was gone, replaced by a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. In 6 months, Jason had aged 10 years. His hair, once his pride, was thinning, and grey unwashed and clinging to his scalp. His skin was pasty from lack of sunlight, and his eyes darted around nervously, scanning the crowd, not for fans, but for threats. Inside courtroom 14, the atmosphere was suffocating. Every bench was full. Former employees of Sterling Vance Dynamics sat on the left, whispering. On the right sat the creditors' men in expensive suits who looked at Jason like he was a piece of rotten meat. And in the front row, sitting with a posture so straight it looked painful, was Arthur Vance. He held his cane with both hands, his face a mask of stone. Next to him was an empty seat. Ethan wasn't there yet. "All rise!" the bailiff bellowed. Judge Halloway entered. The man looked different than he had in family court. There he had been bored, perhaps even slightly sympathetic, to Jason's plight as a concerned husband. Here in federal court, with the eyes of the Justice Department on him, Halloway looked like an executioner. Jason sat down next to Sarah Jenkins, his public defender. She didn't look at him. She was arranging her files with the grim efficiency of a mortician. "We are here for closing arguments and the verdict," Judge Halloway said, his voice booming without a microphone. "But first, the prosecution has requested to recall one witness for a final rebuttal regarding the defendant's state of mind." Jason's heart hammered against his ribs. Who else is left? They had already paraded Marcus Reeves, his former lawyer, who had sold Jason out to save his own license. They had brought out Lisa, who had cried fake tears and claimed Jason manipulated her. They had even brought Dr. Thorne, who looked like a broken man, admitting to every forged prescription. The prosecution calls Ethan Vance to the stand. A collective gasp went through the room. The heavy oak doors at the back swung open. Jason turned. He expected to see the woman he had left 6 months ago, frail, trembling eyes darting at shadows. He prepared his face to look sympathetic, to play the worried husband one last time. But the woman who walked down the aisle was a stranger to him. Ethan moved with a fluid, predatory grace. She wore a cream-colored suit that highlighted her health. Her skin was glowing. Her dark hair fell in lustrous waves around her shoulders. She didn't look at the floor. She looked straight ahead. Her chin lifted. She passed the defense table. Jason leaned forward, an instinctual move to assert dominance, to catch her eye and make her flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't even acknowledge his existence. It was as if he were a piece of furniture. Ethan took the stand and was sworn in. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Mr. Garris, approached the podium. "Mrs. Vance," Garris began softly, "I know this is difficult, but for the jury to understand the intent to defraud charge, we need to understand the mechanism of control. Can you tell us, when did you first realize your husband was gaslighting you?" Ethan adjusted the microphone. Her voice was clear, melodic, and utterly devoid of fear. "I didn't realize it until I was free of it," she said. "That is the nature of the poison. Jason didn't just lie to me about money. He curated a false reality. He paid people to move my keys. He accessed my digital calendar and deleted appointments so I would miss meetings. Then he would show me logs, proving I had never made them. He convinced me that I was losing my mind, so that when I eventually lost my company, I would thank him for taking the burden away." Objection. Sarah Jenkins stood up, though half-heartedly. "Prejudicial. This is a financial fraud trial, not a divorce hearing." "Overruled," Judge Halloway said sharply. "The witness is establishing the method used to secure the power of attorney. Proceed." Garris nodded. "Mrs. Vance, did the defendant ever express concern for your health to you privately?" Ethan turned her head. For the first time, her eyes locked onto Jason's. Jason felt a chill crawl up his spine. Her eyes weren't sad. They were cold. They were the eyes of a judge. "He expressed concern," Ethan said, never breaking eye contact with Jason. "He would hold my hand while my vision blurred from the drugs he put in my tea. He would stroke my hair and tell me that the whispers I heard, whispers he was playing through hidden speakers in the vents, were just my sickness. He told me he was the only one who could protect me. He groomed me to be his victim." "Liar!" Jason slammed his hand on the table, unable to help himself. The silence of the room shattered. "I took care of you. You were sick. You were seeing birds that weren't there. There." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," the judge roared. Ethan didn't flinch. She smiled a tiny, sad smile. "I saw the birds, Jason, because you projected them onto the bedroom wall with a laser device you bought online. The FBI found the receipt in your cloud storage. Item number 402 in the evidence binder." Jason froze. He sank back into his chair. He had forgotten about the receipt. He had been so arrogant, so sure he would never be caught, that he hadn't even bothered to wipe his digital footprint. "I have no further questions," Garris said. Ethan stepped down. As she walked past Jason again, she paused for a fraction of a second. "The locks have been changed, Jason," she whispered, loud enough only for him to hear. "And the paintings you bought, I burned them." The closing arguments were a blur. Sarah Jenkins tried to argue that Jason was a stressed businessman, making poor choices to save a failing company. It was weak. The jury looked bored. When the jury filed out to deliberate, the waiting began. It was the longest 3 hours of Jason's life. He was taken to a holding cell in the basement of the courthouse. He paced the small concrete box, muttering to himself, "It's going to be okay. Minimum security. A camp. I can handle a camp. I'll teach finance classes. I'll write a book. The Wolf of Wall Street guy made a comeback. I can make a comeback." He was delusional to the bitter end. When the bailiff came to retrieve him, the man's face was grim. "Verdict's in." Back in the courtroom, the tension was so thick it felt physical. The air conditioning hummed, but Jason was sweating through his jumpsuit. "Will the defendant please rise?" Jason stood. His legs felt like jelly. Sarah Jenkins stood beside him, but she took a small step away, distancing herself from the blast radius. The foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher with glasses, held the paper with shaking hands. "On count 1 wire fraud. Guilty." Jason flinched. "On count 2 securities fraud. Guilty. On count 3 aggravated identity theft. Guilty." The word guilty rang out 22 times. It was a drumbeat of doom. By the 10th count, Jason had stopped flinching and started swaying. He gripped the table to keep from collapsing. Judge Halloway waited for the silence to settle. He looked over his glasses at Jason. "Jason Sterling," Halloway said. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen murderers, gangs, and thieves, but I have rarely seen a man so completely devoid of conscience. You didn't just steal money. You attempted to steal a human being's soul." Jason opened his mouth to speak, to beg, but his throat was dry as sand. "The federal sentencing guidelines are clear," Halloway continued, "but given the enhancement for vulnerable victim and the sheer scale of the financial damage, I am departing upward from the standard recommendation." The judge picked up his gavel. "I sentence you to 300 months, 25 years, in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. There is no parole in the federal system. You will serve 85% of that time minimum." Jason gasped. 25 years. He did the math instantly. He was 34. He would be nearly 60. His life was over. "Furthermore," Halloway added, looking at a separate document, "we address the matter of restitution. The civil judgments regarding the debt of SV Dynamics operations are upheld. You are personally liable for the outstanding sum of $452 million. "I don't have it!" Jason shrieked, his composure finally shattering. "You took everything. I'm bankrupt." "Then you will work," Halloway said coldly. "Prison wages are meager, Mr. Sterling, but every cent you earn for the next quarter-century will go to your creditors. You are an indentured servant to your own greed." The gavel banged. "Court is adjourned." The marshals moved in instantly. They grabbed Jason by the arms, hauling him back from the table. "Arthur!" Jason screamed, twisting his body toward the gallery. "Arthur, help me! I'll tell them about the tax shelters. I know about the Geneva accounts. Arthur!" Arthur Vance stood up slowly. He put on his fedora. He looked at Jason with an expression of mild distaste, like one looks at a cockroach before stepping on it. He turned his back and offered his arm to Ethan. They walked out of the courtroom, leaving Jason screaming into the void. The transfer to the transport van was rough. The marshals were less gentle this time. They shoved Jason into the back of the armored vehicle, chaining him to the floor. He wasn't alone. Sitting on the opposite bench, shackled to the wall, was a massive man. His head was shaved, and a spiderweb tattoo covered the left side of his neck. His knuckles were scarred, and he smelled of stale tobacco and violence. The van lurched forward, leaving the courthouse behind. Jason tried to make himself small. He stared at his orange knees, trying to stop the trembling. "Just keep your head down," he told himself. "Keep your head down. Do your time, get out." "You are the rich boy," the man said. His voice was deep, heavily accented. Russian. Jason didn't answer. "The one on TV," the man continued. "Sterling." "Yes?" Jason looked up, terrified. Yes, that's me." The man smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a baring of teeth. "I have message for you. From outside." Jason's stomach dropped. I don't know anyone outside. My lawyer. Not from lawyer, the man chuckled. From Tartarus Ventures. You know this name? Jason stopped breathing. Tartarus Ventures. The holding company that held the $150 million debt. The front for the Solonsevskaya Bratva. Sarah had warned him. I don't have the money, Jason whispered, tears leaking from his eyes. The government seized it all. I can't pay. The Russian prisoner leaned forward as far as his chains would allow. We know you have no money, the man said softly. But money is not only currency. In prison, there is other currency. He looked Jason up and down like a butcher inspecting a side of beef. The boss. He was very upset about the default, the man said. He lose face, so he bought your debt, personally. What does that mean? Jason stammered. It means, the man said, leaning back and closing his eyes, that you do not belong to the state of California, Mr. Sterling. You belong to us. We made sure you are going to USP Victorville. My brother is in Victorville. He is expecting you. The man made a small cutting motion across his throat with his finger, then laughed. Jason pulled against his chains, panic overtaking him. Guard. I need protective custody. Listen to me. The grate between the driver's cabin and the back slid open. The marshal's eyes appeared in the slit. Shut up back there, Sterling, the marshal yelled. Don't make me pull over. The grate slammed shut. Jason slumped against the cold metal wall of the van. The reality crashed down on him with the weight of the world. The 25 years weren't just about time. They were about survival. Every shower, every meal, every night in the cell, he would be hunted. He would be a slave to a debt he could never repay. He looked out the small barred window at the back of the van. He could see the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance, shrouded in fog. Somewhere in that city, Ethan was drinking champagne. Somewhere Arthur was laughing. And here in the dark, Jason Sterling began to scream. But the siren of the van was louder, drowning him out, carrying him away into the nightmare he had built for himself. Jason Sterling thought he was playing chess, but he didn't realize he was playing against a grandmaster who had designed the board. His arrogance was his blindfold. He destroyed a marriage, a mind, and a company in pursuit of wealth, only to find that true wealth lies in integrity and loyalty currencies he was bankrupt in. In the end, Ethan Vance didn't just get her company back. She got herself back. She learned that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. And Jason. He learned that when you dig a grave for someone else, you'd better dig two, because the one you fall into might be bottomless. Wow. Talk about instant karma. Jason thought he had won it all, but he ended up losing more than he ever bargained for. What do you think did the punishment fit the crime? Or did Arthur go too far with the debt trap? If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a twist. Share this video with a friend who loves a good drama. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.